You touched a little bit on the difference between Benedictines and Franciscans, and we were talking just before we started. I had a chance to go and spend some time, just a week at a Benedictine monastery. And so you were saying they're more localized and stay in one place, whereas sort of the Franciscan is not tied to one location.
Correct.
And going back a little bit to our beloved St. Francis, the vows of poverty and the other vows that you spoke of may be a little bit foreign to someone who may be listening aren't familiar with those. Could you describe those a little bit?
Sure. Well, let me just say, yes, the Benedictines take an additional vow, a fourth vow of stability. And can you imagine me, an extrovert, being locked up in one place? Oh my gosh, my whole life. I have to be out there. I'm out there. I mean, I'm out there in more than one way, but especially with regard to ministry, I have to get out, So we have two universities, and I worked at one of those two universities for 12 years. So that was a great blessing. But anyway, to answer your question about the vows, yeah, I joke when I give vocations talks to teenagers, I often will couch the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience as no money, no honey, no funny. or no bling bling, no miss thing, and Christ is my king.
That is awesome.
But both of those, as great as those little quips are, they both, if you notice, they're both phrased in the negative. No this, no that, no something else. And the vows are intended, and this is scriptural, and not only is it scriptural, but it's also modeled on Jesus Christ. Okay, I'll explain that in a moment. His life are actually positive things. See, they're ways of loving. So you think, well, you can't have a wife, you can't love a wife, you can't love a family. Well, I mean, that's true, and there is a sacrifice involved in that, no doubt. But by sacrificing that, it opens me up in the vow of chastity to be able to love in a pure way everyone in the church. I can spend myself out there in the church without the responsibilities, the holy responsibilities of marriage and family. Poverty, and Jesus was not married. Poverty, says in the scriptures, Jesus was in obedience, it says Jesus was obedient to the Father. He was obedient even to the point of death. So Jesus was God, but he subjected himself to be a man and then to follow the Father's will. In the Garden of Gethsemane, not my will, Father, but your will be done. So he was obedient in that way. And so we are obedient too, not just for the sake of unity in the church, but also for the sake of sanctity, to sacrifice what? Our own wills, and this is for every Christian. Okay. So maybe not every Christian is going to profess a vow like I did, but of obedience, but I mean, to be obedient to the will of God. I mean, married couples, I don't know if you've experienced this in your marriages, but how many times perhaps have you been invited to go somewhere with a friend, go golfing or whatever, and you say, hold on, I need to check with my wife. Okay. So the obedience there, just to sacrifice our own wills for a greater good. And then, of course, poverty too. We have, cars and houses we live in. We have bank accounts that we can do the work of the Lord. But, we ourselves personally divest ourselves of all those things and so that we're not living in luxury, and we can then focus some of our attentions more on the poor. Again, poverty is almost a way of loving others by surrendering those things we want for the sake of being attentive to the needs of others.
You had mentioned, about having to decide, make these decisions, and the impression one would get would be, well, then the math teaching was left behind, but actually that wasn't the case, right? You took that to Steubenville, and you taught how many years?
I actually, unfortunately, only taught 1 year.
Oh, 1 year. Okay.
2 semesters. The academic dean, the provost was every semester would ask me, the department chair would ask me every year to teach a class, but with all the responsibilities, to whom much is given, much is expected. Mm-hmm. So I did it the first couple semesters and I loved it. I hope to do it again someday.
Do you miss it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I taught, you'll like this, Paul, given I listened to your podcast of your moments that mattered in your life when you were teaching in Durham. And, the students that I had now of course, they're not inner city students and they're at a, private university, but these are students who struggled a lot with math. So, and I love that because I love going in there with my energy and my joy and my excitement and being like, okay, by the end of the semester, you may not love math as much as I do, but you will at least appreciate it. We're going to have fun. Mm-hmm. And it's a finite math course, so it's like Algebra 2 and topics, basically, is what it was. And so I would go, and I always picked the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 a.m. class, when they were most dead, so that I could go in there and just, it was a lot of fun. So I missed
rev them up.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I had to actually give up teaching math a couple of years ago because we had all the secondary programs cut, including the math ed program. And that was a bit of identity crisis, I have to tell you, probably actually for you too. And it's like, well, I've got this thing that I love, but I can't do it. And so, what else is there? And I think it's just very kind of God, to give us those one more chance things, and say, maybe it's not over. You could probably do this in the future potentially, Yes. So I hope you circle back around too. So what does your typical day look like these days?
Yeah. So what we do here at St. Louis Friary in Washington, D.C. is we get up every morning. We have morning prayer and mass first thing in the day. Actually, a little bit before that, we will have an optional holy hour. And a holy hour for us is a time of silent, quiet meditation and prayer, where we all gather in the chapel and we display the Eucharist in a monstrance, and we just pray in front of in front of our Eucharistic Lord like that. And then that's optional for an hour. And then at 7 on weekdays is when we have morning prayer, and then we have mass after that. And it's been we don't take it for granted that we have that daily communal prayer, especially during COVID, where so many people have not had access to going to church in the same way maybe they did before. So we don't take that for granted at all. And then after morning prayer and mass, we get breakfast, and then most of the guys in the house, friars in formation, are studying or working or doing ministry, working around the house, some manual labor, and then going out and doing some ministry. The guys in my care right now are teaching at our local inner city school here in Washington, D.C. Okay. I sent them down there to St. Anthony's, and it's quite a great experience. So anyway, so after all that, after a day of ministry study and manual labor, then we gather for evening prayer. And evening prayer precedes dinner, a communal dinner. Breakfast and lunch, you can kind of pick up whenever, but dinner is a communal event. And then after that, we have an hour or so of free time or meetings, and then we conclude the day with night prayer right before we would retire.
So how has COVID affected all of that? You mentioned that before.
Yeah. Well, we've had to stay a lot. We've had what we've been doing is following the District of Columbia's, requirements on how to care for oneself and also stop the spread. And so we've just, this is sort of one of the nice things about living in a friary, which is very much like a monastery, is that, we have everything we pretty much need here. On a Sunday, some of the guys might use their little petty cash to go out and get some Taco Bell, drive through, of course. But we're doing pretty good. And fortunately, thanks be to God, I hope this doesn't I hope this stays the same, but fortunately, thanks be to God, not one of the 12 friars in the house has gotten COVID yet, even though some of the other Franciscan communities have gotten COVID. So that doesn't mean we're better or God loves us more than the other Franciscan communities. But,
well, you have your bubble, and
yeah, that's true.
It makes a big difference.
Yes, that's true.
So as I understand, you are just starting a doctoral program. Can you talk about that and just kind of what you imagine the future will hold?
Yes. So it is really great. This doctoral program was really God's calling to me. I didn't, if you had asked me a long time ago, are you ever a doctorate? I would say absolutely not. And especially after you get out of seminary, it's so much studying, you're done. But yeah, so I was doing some professional development in the area of in the area of forming young men for the priesthood. But this was in a position I had back at Franciscan University, and then I found out that the professional development that I was doing could be counted at Catholic University of America for some of the coursework credits for this DMin program, Doctorate of Ministry. It's funny, I tell people I'm getting a DMin, D-M-I-N, and I have to be clear about what kind of demon I'm getting here.
Truly.
That's a joke. Anyway, don't be scandalized. Okay. Anyway, so then what happened is let's see. So then, I just prayed about it, and then I asked, of course, with obedience, I had to ask my superiors, and they signed off on it, and so it's Doctorate of Ministry, Seminary Formation, and my dissertation / project is to research, use original documentary sources about the life of St. Francis of Assisi to research how he might have exercised leadership in his life and different kinds of traits of leadership he may have taught to his friars. Even though he never used the word leadership, but just to draw that out. And then also to look at Pope Francis. And see, Pope Francis took his name after St. Francis of Assisi. And so Pope Francis is a modern day example of, even though he's a Jesuit, he's a modern day example of someone who's very dedicated to a Franciscan mindset. And to see how he's practicing and teaching leadership in the church today. So I'm using both these theological methods of aggiornamento and ressourcement to be able to pull together this ancient and this modern Francis, and to be able to develop a new set of leadership attributes that can be used not only for Franciscans, but also for laity. And not just for laity, but for laity who envision themselves having leadership in the church, but also laity who envision themselves having leadership in the non-sectarian, ways, like in the private sector, in the public sector, business, politics, anything. So it's going to transcend the religious realm to kind of examine how we can apply leadership in the church and in the world.
By the way, my program is a DMin as well.
Okay, good.
So it's difficult explaining that to somebody that's not from the DMin world.
Yes. They need to change these abbreviations.
Can they not? It would be the easiest thing in the world. Yeah. It'd be the easiest thing. Well, I think one of the things that I recognize and I think is so valuable in today's context is Benedict had a rule of life. He had a rule for the monastery, and that rule seemed to be and this is where your brilliance can help me out. St. Francis sort of amended or reshaped that rule a little bit.
He wrote his own rule.
Okay.
Yeah, so he actually wrote, so there are 5, in the Catholic Church, there are 5 rules that have been approved. So we have our own rule. Francis wrote a rule of 1221 and 1223. There are two versions of it. And those were intended for the First Order. St. Clare started the Poor Clare Nuns, which he helped her co-found. And then she wrote a rule for that group of Franciscan nuns. And then there was a third group of lay people who followed the Franciscan spirituality, and we call them the Third Order. And I'm in the Third Order The Third Order later adopted, have brothers and priests and sisters in it too. But the Third Order developed its rule from a letter that St. Francis wrote to the laity back in the early 13th century.
That's so interesting. I think a lot of times I've seen these articles, especially around this season for Protestants, why I gave up New Year's resolutions for a rule of life. And it's about, sort of classifying a personal rule of life going forward. But how was it for you transitioning into a rule that you had not practiced fully before? Was it an easy transition in? Because I think from people outside looking in, they think, oh my goodness, here's a rule. They listen to what you have for the day. Yet to experience it, it is so freeing. And it almost, just as you said earlier, these statements of vows seem negative, but actually it's very positive because it opens you up to so many more things. I feel like the rule sort of is like that.
Yes, in fact, our rule is very short. It's only 33 articles, which is a very short paragraph, like a sentence or three. If you have program notes, I can send you a link for it just so your listeners might look it up if they're interested. It's very short. It's a quick read. I read it when I came on my visit to the community. And as soon as I read it, even though I couldn't say I lived it all, I said, this describes what I want to do, what I want to be. I felt very much at home spiritually with the rule. And so I think, it's sort of like maybe falling in love for someone who is married. You're like, well, this is kind of what I wanted. St. Francis of Assisi, so it makes it sort of easy to kind of follow in that path. St. Francis of Assisi, when he opened up the book of the Gospels one day and, discovered his call, he went into church one time, he opened up the book of the Gospels and he read from the Gospel of Matthew about giving up everything he owned to follow Christ, the rich young man story. He said, he closed the book and he said, this is what I want. This is what I seek. This is what I long for with all my heart. And so when I read the rule, again, which is very short, it's just like, this is it. So yes, but it's a lifelong journey to try and live it every day. And we actually read from our rule a different paragraph. Since there's 33 articles, we read a different one every day corresponding to the day of the month before we eat dinner.
One other thing that I happen to notice, and here's a video, Father Gregory running ultra marathon. Yeah. What is the story with you? I know you are raising money, but that's a long ways to run, and that's a lot of training.
Yes. Well, in seminary, our life can be quite sedentary at times. In seminary especially, you're sitting down studying, sitting down in class, sitting down praying, and all those are good things. And even as a priest, too, again, a lot of sitting down praying, sitting down with confession, spiritual direction for people, and all this stuff. So all those things are wonderful things, but I realized pretty quickly in seminary that I needed to get to do something physical and to get some exercise. There's many benefits for that, of course. And then so I just, and so taking a vow of poverty, and also, I just like, what can I do that's pretty cheap? And so all you really need to do is, for running, is have a decent water bottle and decent pair of shoes, and I could buy those. So, and I also witnessed some friends of mine who went to Carolina, by the way, Paul, friends of mine I grew up with in Chapel Hill, who finished the Marine Corps Marathon here in Washington, D.C. I went to go see them finish, and I was like, whoa, this is awesome. So I started running and, built up over the years. I ran between 2003 and 2013, I ran probably about 12 marathons. And then 2003 is when I started the ultra marathons. And I've done probably about, I think, 8 to 10 of those at this point. Most of them are 50 milers and 50 kilometers. 50 kilometers for our listeners and non-mathematicians is about 31 miles. And so, and I just, and it gives me a hobby. I don't want to make it, it can, like anything, it can become addictive, exercise, anything. But I just use it as a hobby, use it for exercise, use it for fun. It's a great way of praying too. Getting out there all by yourself in the nature and not listening to music. I do listen to music sometimes, but but just getting out there and just being one with God and his beautiful creation. Francis would be proud of me about that, I think.
I have one more bonus question, but I just feel like I have to ask, since we just had the events that we did last week in Washington.
Oh, yeah.
Impressions, like people that you've talked to, because, I mean, obviously, we in the country are going to have one set of impressions that are probably more political than anything. But, for you, this is like your city, any impressions on that?
Yeah. Well, the good thing for us, at least, is that we're pretty far away from the action. I mean, we do live in the city. The city is a 10-mile by 10-mile square, roughly. And so we're several miles away from the Capitol building, and we live in a hard-to-find dead-end street. So we're really never in danger. But it is quite shocking. I mean, I think on a spiritual, you're right. I think, Paul, that, that a lot of people will come down on it from a political perspective, but taking the spiritual perspective, I think it causes us, regardless of what one's politics are, I think it causes, it should at least cause us to do a self-examination. Us Catholics are really good at repentance. And I think all Christians should be, to some extent, saying, taking stock of their lives and taking stock of our societal sins too. One of the things that has been said in one of the moral theology textbooks I studied once in seminary was that poverty is a social sin. Now, your question wasn't about poverty, but what kind of other social sins do we have? And I think the events of last week that were so demonstrative should cause us to ask some of those really tough questions of ourselves and of our society, to hopefully, to a specific end. And this is where this may be a very good place to end. What end would it be for us to do this communal examination of conscience? My prayer, and truly this is my prayer, I have prayed this many, many times, is that we as a society and all the polarization that we have, would be able to, use that examination to be able to help bring about greater unity. And unity can be kind of a catchword, like catch-all, and like a lot of secular people can like latch on to unity. But I have to say, especially for your listeners, the only true lasting path to unity and peace is Jesus Christ. All right? Jesus had a prayer. It's in the scriptures, in the New Testament, of course. Jesus had a prayer to the Father. He says that they all may be one. That they all may be one. And that's not just for believers, I think. I think we can apply that at least to people who are non-believers. But Jesus Christ is the way to that path to unity and to peace. And I think, that's where it's at. And so for people who maybe don't believe, we can pray that hopefully they can see that, someday. So.
Well, that's a great word. And as you say, that's a great way to end. So thanks so much, Father Gregory. It's been amazing to see your face after 20 years. That's just awesome. And also to hear kind of the next thing, and God is leading, and it's just wonderful. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us, and we hope that you will join us again next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives, which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We'll relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the Clearness Committee moments, those we choose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.